We're going to be talking about testing tonight. And in order to facilitate the conversation about testing, over the last couple of weeks, in my spare time, I started writing an app. It is not a very pretty app. In fact, it's quite ugly, but it's meant only to help us talk about testing, and the prettiness of the UI doesn't really matter for that. So what this app does is we hit the Reddit API. If you've been around the stream for a while, you know that we use that a lot because it's simple, it's free. We get subreddit information based on what you enter into a text field. So if I type in guitar pedals, because that's a subreddit that I frequent, we'll go out, we'll fetch all the posts that are in there. We present the name of each post, the number of upvotes it has, the number of downvotes, although it says 0 because in making this we found out that Reddit no longer gives out the downvote values in their API. So everything's 0. Everyone's super positive, which is cool. Then down in this little bottom drawer area, I'm calling it, I tell you what subreddit you're searching on, and I calculate the total number of upvotes, and of course the total number of downvotes is 0. Yeah, so that is the super crude app that will help us hopefully talk about some different testing practices tonight. We hope to cover things like unit testing, UI testing. If we have time, we're going to talk about snapshot testing. And I think, Zev, you had a fourth kind of testing that you were interested in. I don't know. I might be misremembering that.
I mean, I'm always down to talk about mutation testing. I forget if there was another type. Oh, you said UI testing. Yeah, probably just that.
Cool. And also, if we have time, we might show you how to do a little CI setup with GitHub. Because really the point of automation testing is you run it against the code, so as you're making changes, you're making sure you're not breaking things somewhere else in the code. And also for your team, if you work on a team, knowing that Zev is making a change and he's not breaking my code, super important to know.
Cool. I'm excited to get into it. And we figured we would do this where Matt built the app and he's going to talk me through what he wanted to do for testing, but I'm going to actually do the typing, because we find that if you're kind of forced to talk someone else through what you want to demonstrate, it's easier to like not gloss over details. So hopefully that'll make it easier for you all to follow along as well.
Yeah. So I did leave a few little things that are helpful for us to talk about different types of testing. Zev, I don't know, do you have like a particular layer or view controller or type of test you want to start with?
I didn't have anything particular in mind. I mean, I always am a little scared of testing the view controller layer, so maybe we'll work up to that and start with some pure logic tests.
Okay. Yeah, okay. So let's take like a half step back and let's talk about what a unit test even is.
Good idea.
So I'll drive on that one real quick. So if you've ever made a new project in Xcode, you've got a couple of checkboxes when you're making a new project that says, do you want to have unit tests and UI tests? If you check yes on both of those boxes, you'll get these two directories that are set up as two different targets in your project. Unit tests are an interesting topic in computing because everyone kind of has their own opinion about what a unit is, but it is, by like textbook definitions, the smallest amount of code that you can test and have value in that test. And then you can start getting into conversations about like TDD and things like that, where TDD stands for test-driven development, where you're writing small tests and then writing the code that passes the test, and then you're writing another small test, and you're writing the code that passes it until you sort of built out your entire application. Which totally is a very useful way of developing software. I did it at my previous job and I absolutely loved it. But it makes you think kind of differently. And so when you're writing a test, the very first thing you want to do is go to one of your test files. You can make them. All they have to do is import XC_test and be a subclass of XC_test case. If you want to talk to code that is in your app, you'll have to do a testable import of your app. That's so you can get around different access layers. So if you have internal functions, you can see those from your test class. And if you didn't know, in Swift, all functions are internal by default. So unless you put public or private in front of it, it's automatically internal, which is just like hiding things if you're making software for other people. So your test function always needs to start with the word test. And I'm just going to say test sum because that's sort of the easiest example. And the test that I want to write is, let's write a comment here. I want to test that given two inputs and output is received that is input 1 plus input 2. Basically, you know, math. We're adding two numbers together. So I guess the easiest test that you could write that is, oh, what's up, Tiny Box? Welcome to the stream. The easiest test you could write is let expected output equals 2 and let actual output equals, and we'll write some function that says sum and we'll pass it 1 and 1. Then every test needs to end with some kind of an assertion. Not necessarily true, but for the sake of right now, every test needs to end with an assertion. So if you do XC_test assert, and in our case I want to do equal, I'm going to check that my expected output is equal to my actual output. So now we're kind of doing TDD on this test right now.
Sorry? You want to just try running the test and see what happens?
Yeah.
I know it's going to happen, but
yeah, totally.
I think it's a good demonstration of what some of the pitfalls of TDD in Swift.
Mm-hmm. So you can see I've run the test and immediately it says can't find sum in scope, which is because we haven't written our sum function. And sort of this is the beginning of TDD where I have defined what our API is. Xcode's telling me that function doesn't exist, so I don't know how to call it. And now we write the function that does it. So if we're doing TDD true to form, I would write func sum where I take in two numbers. The underscore means that I don't care about naming it to the person using the function. And if I'm doing TDD properly, I should write return 2 here, because I know that this test expects me to return 2. Now, I have this nice little sound effect, blink, makes me happy that I've written a good, successful test. But this test isn't really useful because now I bring in 10 here. And the expected output still is 2. So based on me calling sum, I would now expect my output to be 11. And I run my test again, and this time the test should fail because we've hard coded that this is 2. And so to make our test pass, we write the actual function, and we have tested our first function. So if we want to stick with the idea of testing logical code, I don't have strictly logic controllers in here. I have
what about the sum of the point the upvotes? Wasn't that logic-y?
Yeah, I do have that. It's called calculate stats, but it's not in its own little logic controller. So it is in the view controller. I don't know if that's still good enough for you. You don't. There's no interface builder, so you should be able to easily initialize it.
We should be able to do that.
Cool.
So the reason that I wanted to test this one first is that it's a test that I can write that requires the least amount of like building up the world. Like as we get into later, we're probably going to be writing tests where we need to go out to the network perhaps, or have some stub JSON values and have to like manage a lot of app state and maybe even boot up the app and run it and click some buttons. And there's a lot of process there, and it will actually take some time to run those. I wanted to start simple with a test where I can just like Matt showed, run a function with some given inputs and check if the outputs are what we expected. And Matt will set that up while I check in and see if the baby needs me.
Of course. So a common thing to do when you're writing these tests is a lot of people will write a test file that matches a view file. So, or rather, let me phrase it this way: they'll structure their test directory the same way that they structure their app directory, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that if that helps you navigate your project better. Another way that you can organize it is around the types of things that you're testing. And so in our case, we're testing some display logic. So I'll make a new file. It will be a unit test case class. And this might be drawer logic tests. You want me to keep driving, Sev?
I'll take it for a bit. We just have a guest here.
Sure.
So I will usually delete all of the stub placeholder stuff unless I particularly need it. So I'm going to do, and also let's see, I like to bring up the thing I'm testing next to this usually so I can see them together. This is drawer view controller.
Yep.
So I option click that to bring it up over here. So I'm going to do test calculate stats. I'm saying I'm calculating the stats method, testing the calculate stats method. And let's see. So this is a function. It's an instance function on drawer view controller.
Yes.
Now it occurs to me that it doesn't actually use self inside it anywhere. We could potentially make it a static function or pull it out somewhere. Like it doesn't have to be on an instance, but that can be a cool refactor that we do later. So let's start just using it as is. So we know we need a drawer view controller to call this on. So I'm going to let drawer vc equals drawer. Oh, I got to import the thing at testable. Actually, let me show you what it looks like without at testable, just so you recognize the error if you see it. So import the name of the app, and yeah, and then so I'm going to drawer. What is this drawer view controller? Maybe it just wasn't built yet. Right. Okay. So you're like, what do you mean drawer view controller isn't there? There it is. Well, drawer view controller isn't public. And when you import a module or a framework, usually you can only import things for public. So if I at testable import it, this is this magic that means that I can now see things that are normally just internal to the framework. Handing off the baby.
Take control of my mouse for 2 seconds so I can change a command. Cool. All you.
Cool. So you saw the app launch briefly. Actually, it's launching a couple times as it runs through the various tests. And we can talk about that at some point, that we don't necessarily want to be launching the app each time we run a test. So there are things we can do to speed that up, but it's good for now. And you can see in the logs here, we can see all the tests running. And I can pop over to the test navigator here. That's the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So command 6 will take me there, or click this diamond. And it shows all the tests. And I did, what is it, product tests, command U, and that ran all of them. But I don't want to have to run all those tests every time I check this. So I'm just going to click the little diamond next to the test I want to run, and it will only run that one test. And see, that was almost instant. So that's cool. So I've made my Dwarfy controller. And now what I'm going to want to do is call this function with some known input and check the output. So let's do let expected output will be, so it looks like this function returns a tuple with an up sum and a down sum, and those are both ints. So I'm going to say let the expected output equals tuple of, let's say, up sum of 10, down sum of 5. For example, and then let actual output. So now I'm going to call this. So drawer vc dot calculate posts, and now I need to give it some input data. And I don't have like JSON handy unless we have it in the app. I don't think so. So I'll just have to construct some posts manually.
Yeah, there's no JSON in the app.
Okay. So this is some title with, let's see, so I have to make these add up to 10 and 5, right? So, well, actually here, let's do 0 and 0 and make sure it doesn't work. So then let's say, assert equal expected output. What do you usually do, actual or expected first? Doesn't matter, but
I kind
have a convention.
I kind of do expected actual, I think.
Okay.
I think maybe I switch it. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know either.
I also don't always use expected and actual if there's like a few things that I want to test.
Sure. Oh, we should at some point link to my blog post about if there's a few things you want to test, like a bunch of inputs to a bunch of outputs. There's some nice tricks you can do there.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, we're going to run into a little bit of an issue if I try to run this, and it will say type up sum int, down sum int, which is a tuple of 2 integers, cannot conform to equatable. That's because tuples are what's called non-nominal types. It's not a named type, it's just a little type you constructed ad hoc, and those can't be equatable. I think somebody's adding that to Swift right now, but it's not there right now. And unfortunately, XCT assert equal requires things to be equatable, but that's okay. We can just do XCT assert true or XCT assert, and then put the equal sign in ourselves. The output in the log won't be quite as nice, but it'll get the job done. There are other things we could do here, but that'll work. Okay, so let's see. Actually, yeah, I do want to talk about that. So we can see here that it failed, and if I look in the log, all we know is that the assert true failed. We don't know why it failed. We don't know what we got wrong. We don't know if one or both of these were wrong and by how much. If these values were equatable, I would just use XCT assert equal, but because I can't, I'll break it down. I'll say XCT assert equal expected dot up and actual dot up, and then I'll do the same for down. And the reason I'm doing this is to get a better signal to noise ratio for my tests, where I want to actually get useful information here so I can pinpoint exactly what went wrong. And so that's why I'm demonstrating a failing version first. So now I'm going to run it. And now we can see XCT assert equal failed, 10 is not equal to 0. XCT assert equal failed, 5 is not equal to 0. So that's a pretty useful test. I can make it even a little more useful by adding a little message here. I could say up sum, and here I could say down sum, and I believe the log will now tell us, yep, it tells us which is which. So that's pretty dang useful. Now these, especially because you often end up reading these messages, like if you're working on a big project with a team, you'll read these messages on a web page on a build server somewhere. You don't get this nice inline output. So it's really useful to have good readable log messages.
So real quick for Kevin,
Yes.
can you explain why equals equals worked, but assert equal did not?
Yeah, good question. So if I do expect output equals actual output, and can I do this? Can I jump to definition on the equals? Let's see if that works. Yeah, cool. So in swift.misc, there's just like a bunch of miscellaneous definitions and things, and this inability to conform non-nominal types to protocols is like this annoying thing that the Swift team knows about, and so to work around it, they've just defined a bunch of free functions for like, here's equals equals on a tuple of two equatable things, and here's not equals on a tuple of two equatable things. And then let's see, I think I can browse. Oh yeah, here's equals equals on a tuple of three equatable things. You see where this is going? Let's see. Here's 4, 5, 6, 7. Okay, so they go up to 6 or 7.
6.
And if you want to equals equals two tuples of 7 things, you just can't do that, or you have to write this function yourself. Eventually, I believe this will be implemented, so they don't have to do this silly workaround. Yeah, it's just something that's been in there forever. These are basically just generated or hard-coded or something. So the equals equals function exists and knows how to handle two tuples of the same type, but the tuple itself is not equatable. It doesn't conform to the equatable protocol. That's the difference there.
Paul says that the label is super useful, and I would take it even a step further. It's useful for identifying which of these failed, but if you have a test that has a bunch of setup, which we might find later in the session, you can put whatever you want in that message. So you can say actual sum should be 10 because addition works correctly, and then
sure.
That goes into your log and be like, oh, addition didn't work correctly. Let's go figure out why we don't know how to add two numbers together.
Yeah, that's a great point. Okay, so we've done some quasi-proper well, it's not quite TDD because we already have a function that we think works, but we've written a test and we've made it fail. Now we make it pass by fixing the test in this case. So I just need to put a couple of posts in here and then make the totals add up. So let's just say this is like, up first and then down, down first and then up. That's something worth noticing. So downs need to add up to 5. So like 1, 2, and 2. And then these will be 10. So 5, 2, and 3. If you come away with one thing from tonight, it should be Control-Option-Command-G. I'll say that again, Control-Option-Command-G. It runs the last test you ran. So if you just clicked one of these diamonds, or like 4 diamonds or whatever, it will run just the last thing you ran, which is super useful for quick iteration. That's under the product editor somewhere. Wonder where that is. I have no idea. I found it once and then just have never gone back to the menu.
I don't know if it's in the menu. I think it's just in the shortcuts, the keybinds.
It highlighted the product menu when I ran it. I think you have to. Oh, here we go. Product perform action, run this thing again. So it's like a different name every time because it's whatever you actually ran again. But yeah, it's Control-Option-Command-G. And there's also, I don't know what the difference.
What's the U version? Well, I mean, we could write another test and see what shows up there.
I think it's the test class versus the test case. Maybe, I'm not sure. Anyway, there you go. That ran. So it looks like that's passing now. So hooray. We have done a simple logic test.
Zev, what's a good way that we can show that we've actually tested the code? Hint, hint.
Are you hinting at mutation or something else?
That we have maybe covered some amount of code.
Oh. Yes, good. Sorry, I didn't pick up on that. So what Matt is alluding to is, wouldn't it be nice if you could get sort of a quick temperature reading of like, how much of my code am I actually testing? And the way you do that is something called code coverage. And code coverage keeps track of every line of code in your project during a test run, and it just notes if a particular line is run during your tests. And we probably have to turn coverage on because I'm not seeing coverage reports here. So if you go into your scheme here, you edit the scheme for your project. That's the little thing up here. It's called the scheme menu or scheme picker or something. And let's see, you want to go to the test step, and you go to, is it info?
Options.
Diagnostics. Which one is it?
Options, I think.
Options. Cool. The last one I chose. Okay, so gather coverage for, and then all targets or some targets. Let's see. Do we want? Probably just all targets is fine. And I'm just going to run the whole test suite. Command U to run all the tests. That's product test, and I think you can also press and hold the run button, and you get a test button. So it's going to take a bit to run all the tests. And we can go over here to the report navigator and actually kind of watch it while it's going.
It's got failed selected right now if you click on all.
Oh. It may still not show everything until the full test suite is done running. Just take another second to finish running these. I think these are some of the UI tests, or the ones that are taking a while. I think there's also a performance test in there too.
Yeah, all the example tests are still in there.
Yep. Okay, there we go. So now we can see all the tests. We can see how long they took to run, and lots of details stuff. There's a launch performance test, which is cool. I was playing with that recently. But what we can do is we can go in the report navigator under coverage, and we can see that this app has 46% coverage, which means that 46% of the lines of code were run at some point during the test. And if we flip it open, we break down further by file. But what's really cool in Xcode is you can actually see this coverage information inline. So you can see here in the view controller, if you don't have it turned on, I believe it's under editor. Down here, you can turn on viewing code coverage if it's not on, and you'll get this kind of ribbon down the right side of your editor, and it will show you in line how many times a particular line of code was run during your test suite. So you can see this line was run, this function was called 4 times, this chunk here was called 84 times, this one was called 4 times. This is cool. This little kind of candy stripe thing means that you can see when I highlight it, almost the whole thing is green, but just that pair of brackets is red. And that's because this side of the expression was run, but we never had a nil there, so this never nil coalesced, so it never ran the right side, which is just like a really cool little extra bit of UI. They do that for ternary expressions as well, so it's like really slick attention to detail on the code coverage stuff. What we can also see here, we can just sort this by coverage to see where the hotspots are. Like, oh, cool. Models has no coverage, so maybe this is somewhere that would benefit from adding some tests. And we can flip this open and see all the functions that don't have coverage right now. Whereas something like our drawer view controller actually has pretty good coverage in that almost all of these lines ran during the test suite. As we'll see in a bit, coverage isn't necessarily the whole story. Because just because a line of code was run during a test doesn't mean we were actually testing that line of code, but we'll come back to that. Coverage is a decent first start in terms of how much of my app am I testing. Okay, I think we've put that logic test to bed.
Yeah, it feels good.
Unless we wanted to talk about refactoring it into a static function and see how the test would help us do that, but I don't think we necessarily need to. We can probably move on.
Cool, let's do it.
But if people want to see stuff like that, or if you have other questions, feel free to post them in the chat.
So other logic functions. This one is a logic function, but it's not a pure function, meaning it does not have an output.
Got it. Okay, so it's not a function that takes something in and returns something. Instead, it's a function that takes something in and, well, it's almost a pure function. It takes something in and modifies it.
Mm-hmm.
So it's saying, color this cell. So this is like the imperative color. Please color this for me, rather than like it's not returning a color. It's saying color this cell, please. And then it looks like it's taking the index path and checking to see if it's even, and if it's even, it's changing the color, right?
That's correct.
So do you want to maybe write a test for this?
Yeah, I think it'd be a useful one.
Cool. So it looks like this is in the post table view controller. So I'm going to do new unit test class, posts. I'm just going to call it post VC tests because life is short and names of things are long. And bring this up where I want to see it. Okay, so we're going to be testing functions. So test color table view cell. So let's see, this one, we need to pass in a cell index path and then ask the cell that comes out some colors. And this is also an instance function. This is an instance function on post table view controller. So theoretically, I should be able to make a view controller. Android Studio has automatic importing, and I'm very jealous all the time. So we can make a post table view controller. Let's just make sure we can get that far. And then, well, okay, let's think about this. Before I was just setting up one set of inputs and running it and checking the output. In this case, we kind of have two cases, right? We have the odd case and the even case. We want to make sure they both work correctly. So I'm kind of wondering, like, should I make two functions? I think I'll make two functions. So I'll test even color table view cell, and then I'll make another one that's test odd color table view cell. And you'll probably find differing opinions on this. Some people would put both sets of assertions in the same function, and that's not wrong. It's sometimes nice to have a little bit more isolation. So if one of them fails, you can say, oh, cool, evens work, but odds don't, or something like that. But it, like,
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead.
Paul asks, what was the magic you did to open the file? Did you drag it to the right panel?
Oh, so you can actually drag it if you want. You can drag a file and drop it up in the little like file thingy up here, and it will, I guess, make a new tab these days because that's how things work now. But what I did is, let's see, if you have nothing open, you can option click something, it will pop it open in a new editor. If you already have other editors open, you can shift option click something and it will give you a choice, and then you can use your arrow keys or the mouse and sort of move around up, down, left, right, and figure out where you want to put the file and hit return, and it will drop it there. So that's, again, option to just put it in a new editor, boom, boom, right? I can end up just like splitting. Oh, you might have a different behavior turned on. So it looks like this is just alternating which editor, and shift option will let you choose.
I believe I have it set to the default, which is whatever is the active window, left clicking goes into it, and then option clicking goes into the other one. We have another question in chat. My app uses Bluetooth. Can tests be run on actual hardware, or does it run in the emulator? You can kind of do both. So
yeah, you can,
with Bluetooth, you can write a protocol that wraps the Bluetooth SDK that's in iOS, and you can make sure that your app responds to things that would happen from that SDK. We could do an example of that because we do have delegates in this project. So in that case, you could run it on simulators, but if you want to test actual like physical device Bluetooth stuff, it gets a little bit more difficult, but it's still technically possible. You could plug a phone into a computer, usually a CI server, and have whatever Bluetooth hardware you need near enough to the device that there is connection. It's a little bit extra setup work though, because you'd also want to log what goes on the device side to make sure that the phone's connecting to it correctly. But yeah, so you can. I don't have my phone. I just got the new phone and I don't have it registered on my account yet. But you can plug in a physical device and you can run tests against that physical device.
Yeah, and there are some things like performance testing that you want to do on a physical device because performance on the Mac simulator isn't really comparable to the phone. I'm actually wondering.
I will caveat and warn with this. My previous job, we had this beautiful setup where we had 5 Mac Minis mounted to the wall, each with 3 different phones plugged into them. And every pull request that got merged, we'd run all of our tests on those devices, and it was so cool to see them light up. Except we did it so much that the batteries actually expanded in a few of the phones. So, you know,
Yikes.
Maybe don't do it with your everyday phone, and maybe keep an eye on it.
I'm wondering whether the new Apple Silicon stuff would change any of this, because theoretically, if you write an iOS app that uses Bluetooth, if you run that app natively in Big Sur on Apple Silicon, it should be able to access the Bluetooth hardware. I think what this question asker is driving at is that you can't access Bluetooth in the iPhone simulator, but if you run the app natively on Big Sur, you should be able to talk to the Bluetooth hardware directly. So that might change some things. If you're okay with your app running as a Mac app, not an iPhone app, then I bet that will work for you.
Yeah, Kevin says the phones grew 2 times as thick. He worked with me. He knows. He actually, I think, sat next to it for a little bit. So, you know, watch out if you're gonna do it with your personal devices.
And if you want to see what that looks like, check out the subreddit Forbidden Pillows. Anyway, okay. So yeah, good question. A lot of this stuff is about simulator, but you can run logic and UI test on device as well. All right, let's throw together a test. So I'm going to write something for even and then duplicate it and change some stuff for odd. So I'm just going to make a cell. And then, oh, can I name it like that, or do I need to do anything fancy? I think I can just do that. It won't get the like style and reuse identifier, but I think it'll be okay. I guess we'll find out. And then I'm going to style it. So normally I would have some input. I'm just going to throw it an index path that I know the row is even and another one that's odd. So I'm going to say color the cell for index path with row, let's do 0, which is even, and section doesn't matter, it can be anything because it looks like this function doesn't use it. And more to the point, like we shouldn't know that the implementation of this function doesn't use it. So, you know, I don't know if you'd maybe change the function name or document it to say, you know, this cares about the alternating number of the row or something like that. If you make too many assumptions about the implementation of a function when you're testing it, then, you know, sort of, are you really testing it? And if you change the function, is the test still going to be valid? So, okay, so we're going to color, and then we're going to ask the cell some questions. We're going to say, we're going to ask the cell, is your text label text color equal to an ability to type? Okay, so I'm just basically copying what we did here. And then start equal cell detail text label text color, is that equal to light gray? And is your cell's background color equal to dark gray? So let's just see if that works by itself.
Paul says in the chat, I like my test names to read what should happen. Thoughts on test color even cell dark background and test color odd cell light background?
That so yes, if a test makes one assertion, it's really easy to do that. You say exactly what you're asserting, and there's like a lot of rigor that you can impose around like how you name and structure your test. I wouldn't use a name like that here because I'm not asserting just a dark background. If I wanted to do that, I would break this single test up into 3 tests, and like you can do that. there are arguments to be made that you should break them down to exactly one assertion per test. So I feel like sometimes it gets a little hairy, though.
Yeah. John Reed, who has a blog that I believe is solely about testing, he had a good post about test naming, and he does suggest a similar style to what Paul does, and I do it as well on my tests. So if I were to rename this one, I would maybe name it test color makes cell dark when even.
Sure.
And that kind of gets towards a different style of testing. So we talked about TDD at the start of the session. There is another kind called BDD, behavior-driven development, that uses a popular framework. You don't have to, but uses a popular framework called Quick and another framework called Nimble. And it's really all about sort of creating sentences about what you're testing, because you're testing behaviors as opposed to individual units. And you can kind of get around importing that framework by doing similar test names, where I'm testing a behavior here where my function color makes my cell dark when, I could even say index is even. And when I teach people testing, I like to sort of drive that naming standard home, because it, at least in my experience, helps people see what they're testing, as opposed to just like, I wrote a test that says cell, test cell. What am I testing? What about the cell am I testing? What's the goal that you're trying to get out of this test? But I think the name that you have here kind of conveys that as well, especially because what's nice about your test is the name is loose enough that if we change what the even color is, we don't have to rename the function. We don't have to really do a whole lot other than change the assertions.
Yeah, and that's something you can get around with some sort of self-discipline around naming. Like, even if you are doing what Matt is talking about and Paul in the chat is talking about, where you name sort of what the test is actually testing, you can still try to like avoid implementation details. So don't say test that it makes it dark, just say like, test that it makes the cell's color the expected color or whatever, because the color itself may change and you don't necessarily want to have to go change all your test names. It's more about like semantic naming potentially. I think you could probably argue on either side for that.
Mm-hmm.
So I ran this test and I noticed something interesting, which is that so tests will show a green thing if it passes and a red thing if it fails, but individual lines, they'll only show something if it failed. If it passed, it just won't show anything. So since we don't see any highlight on this line, we can assume that it passed successfully. But this one here failed, and I'm wondering what happened, and I'm going, oh, nil is not equal to some weird private Apple color space name that I assume is what they give you when you ask for a UI color light gray. So, okay, nil, why was this nil? Oh, well, this is an optional unwrap. So detail text label was nil, so its text color was nil. Why was detail text label nil? And we can debug this. I'm happen to notice right here that in the original code, Matt was initting a cell with a subtitle style. And then presumably that's what gives it the detail text label. So I think I'll probably just go in here and say, use the style reuse identifier initializer. You could potentially, I don't know if people have opinions about like what other ways you might want to handle that, because this is sort of making an assumption that you have to initialize a cell in a certain way. Like this won't configure a cell properly if it doesn't have the right style to begin with. But anyway, that's just a little detail I noticed. So we should be able to run that again.
I think that does bring up an interesting topic about what do you test in something. Mm-hmm. And the answer that people will usually give, and I will put it out there that I think it is the correct answer, is it depends on what's important. For me, I'm mostly comfortable if you hit every conditional. So if you have an if, a guard, a switch, as long as each code path in there is hit, I'm okay with it. Our former organizer says that for every acceptance criteria that is in a ticket, you should have a test, and I also agree with that. I don't think that that's at all wrong. But I think there's a conversation, if you're on a team, to be had there about what is important to make sure is right and safe and covered. And so in this case, you might even want to not assert the detailed text label's color, and you'd still have a passing test.
And in some of these things, we may find that like this type of test isn't really the right test for it, and something more like a snapshot test where you actually take a picture of it could be more applicable. But I think we'll still learn some stuff by finishing out this test. So that was even. Let me just copy paste everything in here. Right, triple click doesn't work over Zoom. Hey, Zoom, fix it, please. And then we're going to say this one is an odd number. Now, this brings up a question. What do we assert here? What should the values be? Because the app isn't specifying them. I guess we want them to be whatever the default value is. And I think, Matt, I think you have some idea of where this might be going based on something you said when we spoke earlier.
Mm-hmm.
So we could like run. So here, just sort of naively like approaching like, okay, I have to write some test. What would I do? I might stick a breakpoint in here and run the code and stop on the breakpoint and figure out, okay, I can print out cell.textLabel.textColor. See the UI dynamic system color with some, it doesn't even tell me the value. It would be hard to actually.
The name is the value. That's the semantically named color.
Oh, it's a semantic color. So if I take this and I said this is, so it's the system dot label color.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. Okay. So then detail text label dot text color. So that's the same. And it's label color here and not just dot label because this is the Objective-C name, presumably. And this one, I don't know what it is yet, is background color. It doesn't have a background color. So I could say XCT assert nil, the background color. And I use nil instead of equals. It's always best to use the most specific of these XCT assert functions that they give you, because it will give you the best error message. So use equal instead of just asserting true that some expression with an equal sign is true. Use nil if nil is what you care about. And if I jump to definition on this, you'll see there's a whole bunch of XCT assert whatever functions. And definitely they're a bit hard to read because of all the extra boilerplate stuff in here, but maybe this would be easier to read. Yeah, so you've got assert equal with accuracy for floating point stuff, false greater than, less than, nil, no throw, throws error, and then you can assert on the error, assert just fail always if you reach a branch that should never happen. And then you can write your own that check some specific thing and log out a useful error message, just so it's really clear in the logs what's going on.
So we have two great questions in the chat. Cool. I'm going to phrase the first one differently than it was asked to give you a lead in. So Zev, we've got a good deal of code that is duplicate code between our two functions. What can we do to write it once and reuse it?
Great question. So I was writing these basically self-contained because I don't know what else I'm going to put in this file, and I don't know if it would make sense to have a view controller at the top level, but sure, if we are thinking that we're likely to need one of these and maybe even one of these at the top of the, in every function, notice that this is just a class and it will be instantiated by the test runner So we can actually pull out the view controller and the cell and put them at the top level, and these will now be available in every function, just like any old Swift class. So let's try running that again and see if it still works. Whenever you make a change to your tests, you should run it again and see if it still works. And there's this neat thing they do where you might think, well, if this cell is global, like what if one of the test functions modifies it and then another one, is looking for something that it's confused about because the cell was modified in another function? I believe that it will actually tear down and build up the actual instance of the class once for each test. So this test and this test will run on different instances of that class. And I believe if we print self in both of them, we will be able to validate that that is the case.
So there are actually two versions of that function. One that's a class function that's run once for the test file, and then an instance one that's run for each test.
For if you do setup, yeah.
For teardown as well.
But we're not using, but we're not using those.
Yeah.
But yes, that's true. Here, let's see if we get our instance, did it print? Where's my print?
I don't know. The other question that was good while you're trying to figure out why it's not printing, do you test in every project? I will say yes, but I don't test everything in every project. I test what I consider to be the important things in my projects, where like if this breaks, I'm in trouble. Like that's the bare minimum for me. I do try to test as much as possible, but there are some things that it's just harder to test than it's worth having the test. So we're right here testing the colors are set based on logic. I don't know if I would personally write this test, but this is a good test to have the conversation around. Because I personally don't care if my cell is not colored correctly as long as the cell is actually on the screen. And there's a different kind of test that we can write for that.
This is a good point. It's hard. Oh, okay, there we go. Object identifier. Yes, it is giving us two different instances. So yeah, it's tearing down and building up this object every time you run the test. I just wanted to make sure. The documentation is a little confusing on that, but yeah. But you could also make these var, like just what Matt was alluding to with setup and teardown. So if I made this var cell, and for whatever reason you needed like a new instance that you controlled yourself, there's this method built in called setup, and my recommendation is just use the error one, because then you can throw errors if you need to, and the test runner will show that, will catch the error and show it in a useful way. So maybe we'd have a UI table view cell, and then in setup, we could instantiate that cell, and then in teardown, you could, it will nil out automatically, but if you need to do some other teardown, you could do it here. So this just gives you a little more control over setup and teardown. Oftentimes you don't need it, but if you're like connecting to databases or whatever, that can be useful. And then it lets you share stuff between test runs, or not share stuff, but shared setup. How do you determine when something should be written as a unit test versus UI test? Another good question. I would say go with unit if you can, because they're faster and generally easier to maintain. It depends what you're testing. Like Matt was saying, it may not be super productive to be testing these as a unit test, because what we really care about is what it looks like, and getting into some of the details maybe fiddly. But then again, with a UI test, you get into issues of like different font sizes and other stuff about making sure it actually looks like what you want it to look like. So it can definitely be, it's a case of trade-offs where unit tests tend to be easier to maintain and are in general lower maintenance, but they may not tell you stuff in the most useful way. UI tests are generally pretty high level, but they're often fiddly and require a lot of babysitting.
I'd take that a step farther, and I would say there's UI testing that Apple gives us out of the box with XE UI test. I would use that as something that's called an integration test, where you're actually testing the whole system. And we could actually transition to starting to talk about UI tests now, because there's a perfect segue into it. Where you don't like, so okay, there are, just like anything in programming, there's bountiful ways that you can solve the problem of testing your UI. So you could, in this test, look at the simulator, and we could initialize the table view, and we could pull a cell that's actually in the table view and test that, and you'll see the view actually come up in the simulator. But that's slow. Actually loading the UI is slow, which is why UI tests are slow. Because they're slow, I like to get as much out of my UI test as possible. So I would test a flow that a user might take in the app. So in the case of our app, I can take over real quick. I might test that it launches, and that, you know, the table scrolls, and then maybe the user can type into the text field in a different subreddit, and the view changes. That to me would be a great UI test, and I could assert that the values in my label changes, things like that. But to actually use a UI test just to check that the screen came up is really, really heavy for what you're getting out of it. There is a third kind of, or yet another kind of test that Apple doesn't give us out of the box. It's called a snapshot test, where you can actually load up the simulator, take a screenshot of it, and compare screenshot to screenshot. Or you could do a variable dump, and you can compare the state of the view controller against the state of the view controller. Point Free makes a good snapshot testing library that we might get to, but I do want to use this time now to switch over to UI testing, if you're feeling confident and ready for that, Zev.
Sure. And I'll add one other thing that's a good case for UI testing is there's some stuff that both is harder and possible to write as a unit test, maybe because it deals with like Apple's system frameworks where you don't actually have access to the variables you need. And also it's something that is like really hard to notice yourself. So I was just working on one recently where, I don't know if we'll be able to find an example, but let's see how well they populate this. Are there any folders? Yeah, here. So in iOS 14 and above, if you press and hold on a back button, you get a little menu of all the things in the back button. And so I spent a bunch of time writing UI tests for the contents of the menu from the back button, because like making sure that's right is annoying to do by hand and is like fiddly to do with a UI test, but it's a good way to make sure it stays working. Yeah, so let's do let's see, were you thinking something along the lines of what you just did, the clicking and typing and swiping?
Yeah, that works.
Cool.
Good question in chat. Do you write tests after you build features, or do you prefer TDD or BDD?
For me, it depends. If there's something where there's anything complicated and business logic-y, where I'm not sure that I'm getting it right, like when I used to work at an agency, this was especially true because we were always working in some client's obscure domain. Like, you know, they have their model, they have whatever their things are, and I can't just look at that and go, oh yeah, that's right, because that user has access to that thing, but they're not in this group. Like, you know, that's the kind of stuff that their employees know and I don't. And so I would try to write, do like TDD to say, okay, here's the spec that the client told me. So I know what they're expecting to be true. Let me write up some tests to kind of document that and confirm that that's working. Versus say with the back button thing, I didn't write any or many tests beforehand. I'm actually it was kind of a mix. I was kind of swimming through back button soup until I figured out how to actually fix the bug, and then I took a crack at fixing the bug, wrote some tests that confirmed that my fix worked, and then in sort of fine-tuning those tests, found more cases where there were things I had missed, wrote extra cases to do a proper TDD. Like, okay, I've demonstrated this doesn't work with a test. Now I can go and fix it. So definitely kind of a mix rather than a more formal approach for me.
Yeah, I'm the same. I really do like TDD, but it's very difficult if you're testing something you've never coded before, or like you're not entirely sure how something should act. Like definitely when you're coding a function, you're sort of like breaking down the logic as you go. And with TDD, it helps do that. But if it's something complex that you've never done before, you're kind of like going between documentation and Stack Overflow and like trying to write your test. So at my previous company, we were strictly TDD, and we would, if you've never done something before, you might write the function, delete it, and then you can write the test because like you've gotten the idea out, but then you're not really TDDing and gets into weird gray areas. But for bugs, like Zev mentioned, I always do try to have a test for my bug, and if the bug takes a lot of setup, a test is perfect for that because you can do all that test in the setup function or at the top of the file instead of having to click through a bunch of things and hit databases, hit network endpoints, and all that.
That's a great point. A good bug report will usually translate pretty seamlessly into that format. That did we have it? Oh yeah, given this given thing. There's a more formal version of that, which I think is called a gherkin test, which is given, when, then, and a good bug report will be in this format anyway. And this pretty much, smoothly translates to given, some input, when I do some operation, then some expected result happens, right? That's the basic format. So you just literally copy and paste your bug report into your code as comments and then fill in like Mad Libs, fill in the different sections, and there's your test. Easier said than done, but it's a way to think about it. I don't know why it's called a gherkin test.
It's really into pickles.
Yeah. Okay, so we were going to jump into UI tests. And now the default way that Apple sets this up is that there's actually a totally separate target for UI tests. And it helps kind of keep things separate. UI tests generally take a lot longer to run because it's having to launch your app and kind of look at the UI. And that takes a long time. So it's a totally separate thing. And they give you some fun placeholder stuff. I'm going to get rid of teardown because we're not using it. I'm going to get rid of this. Actually, the example is pretty good. And then they give you a neat sort of sample test, which is testing app launch performance. There's actually some really cool stuff. If you have like a big app that launches slowly, you can measure the launch performance and then see how it changes over time, which is pretty cool. Like there's some neat performance stuff that you can get into, but we're not doing any of that, so I will delete it. And they give you a starting point. Apple's UI testing is a little bit interesting. It's a little bit weird. Everything we've done so far, you're just interacting with the code in your app, right? You instantiate a view controller, you call some methods on it. It's kind of what you would expect, I guess. I don't know if I would expect it, but it seems pretty straightforward. UI tests are completely different because you don't actually have access to any of the code in your app when you're writing a UI test. UI tests interact with your app at the same level of the system as accessibility does, which means they are basically exploring the UI by asking the app, hey, describe the app to me as you would describe it to an accessibility device like a Braille display or the voiceover screen reader or something like that. And so the app will give it back basically a bunch of little rectangles, and it'll say like, I'm a button, I'm a label, I'm a scrolling thing. And then you interact with those elements. So it's this like level of abstraction on top of your app. It's definitely weird. It takes some getting used to. Fortunately, you can record UI tests as a nice starting point. So I think that's a good place to start.
While you're doing that recording, I'm going to take my dog out real quick.
Cool. Everybody's walking their dogs. Okay, so so the app is running here, and let's see, what can I do here? I don't know if Matt has added clicking to these cells. Okay, so I can tap a cell, but nothing happens. But you can see it wrote a line of code for me, which is kind of neat. So we'll go back and look at that. Let's see, we were talking about scrolling down. So I'm going to scroll, and you can see that it added a swipe up action. And then we were going to go in here and delete this and type guitar pedals. Oh, I stopped being able to type. There we go. And hit return. And now we've loaded the guitar pedals subreddit. And then, yeah, okay, that's a good start of the test. Oh, it looks like it did something weird on that last one. I think because I was having trouble with the screen share. So let me just redo that last part. So I put the cursor where I want to record. Oh, let me stop the app. I think it will play through the test up to that point and then let me record, which is kind of cool. So we should see it load up, tap the first cell. Maybe? Is it not going to do that? Okay, I probably was just wrong. So that's fine. I'll click in here. Huh, so I typed stuff, but it didn't actually do anything useful. So that's something we can talk about. The recording is definitely not a final state. It is more of a starting point. But we can look at what it did. So it made an app, but we already had an app. Oh, actually, sorry. That's why the recording went weird, because it didn't actually run again because it introduced a compile error. So it's not super smart. Like, there was an app, XCUI application. This is this object you use to tell your app to do things like launch, and that's pretty much it. Maybe one other thing. So I think I need to, let me try that one more time, and if it doesn't work, we'll move on. So record. Yep. Okay. It's just going to be weird. I don't know exactly why, but we'll figure that out. So let's not have that and not have. Well, I'll leave that in for a second, and I'll talk about it. So let's look at what we've got here. We have an app. We tell the app to launch. You can set various options on this if you need to before you launch the app, and then it's going to make a query. So everything in XC UI testing is like queries. So you don't just ask the app. In this case, it's getting the app's tables. You don't just get the tables. You get this thing. Let's see. It is an XC UI element query. So this is a query that will run on the app when you execute it. It's very weird. It definitely takes a lot of getting used to. So we're asking, okay, tables. Get your static text, find this text, r/a has a Discord server. Well, that's not a very useful thing to tap on, because that's just the top post right now. I don't know if I really want to tap on that. So if I click this little arrow here, there are other options, other things that resolve to the same element. Neither of these is actually that useful. I think I actually so this one's interesting, right? Cells, static text, this thing. I think I want to take that as a starting point. And then I'm just going to say cells first match. So just say, hey, tap on the first cell. That's not going to do anything in this example because we don't have any behavior on cell tap. I just want to give you an example of like how you might find and tap on a cell. And then we're swiping up, and I don't really care about swiping up on this cell in particular. I just want to swipe up on the table. So I think I can actually do that by saying tables first match on the table. So I'm just going to swipe up on whatever the first table in the app is. And then this one is just garbage. Look at this thing. Get the application, get the windows, get the children of type other, get the element and the children of type other like 1,000 times, and then finally we get a text field, and then we tap on it, and then it just didn't record the typing, probably because the keyboard wasn't visible or screen share or something. This is a mess. Let's see if I can rewrite this. I'm going to do something like, I think text fields. Yeah, text fields is a query type. They give you a bunch of built-in queries. If you look in the docs or the headers, you get your static text, which are basically labels, scroll bars, here text fields, date pictures, text views, menus, menu items, maps, web views, like basically any of the normal view element types that Apple gives you. If it's your own views, you have to do a little bit of work, but they give you these queries for all the things, and then you can match them by what text is in them, or in this case, we know it's going to be the first text field in the app right now. So I'm again going to say first match, and then can I type? Yeah. So, or maybe I want to, how do I delete it? I want to delete the text in the field.
Oh, I've done this before. I think there's a way to like type negative characters.
Oh, interesting. I wonder if I just type an empty string, will it replace the text? Let's try that first. So I'm click the diamond, I'm playing back the test now. So we should see it actually go through these actions. It'll tap the first cell, hopefully, if it works. Find the cell, tapped it, scrolled it, and then it's doing a bunch of stuff down here, but yeah, it had a hard time typing text. This might be where we want to activate the old how many times I've had to Google something button.
Well,
oh, and
so if you look at
better luck recording an empty test, and I think that is probably accurate.
If you look at the error, it does give you a whole bunch of gobbledygook, but it tells you neither element nor any descendant has keyboard focus.
Oh, we have to tap it first.
Yep.
Okay, great. Look at that, reading error messages. So if I want to use this text field multiple times, it probably makes sense to pull it out into a variable. App text fields first match, and this first match will fail if there's no text fields, so you'll get a nice quick failure there. You want your test to fail early and often, so you can figure out what's wrong. So text fields first match. Okay, there. So first, I want to text field dot tap. So we'll just do a tap, and then we'll see about typing some text. Whoops, not Command R. Wrong keyboard shortcut. And these logs can be daunting, but it actually tells you all the stuff it's doing, and you kind of get a feel for how XCUI test works. So it's like, find the cell, check for interrupting elements affecting the cell. It's like waiting for all the animations to die down, then synthesize the event, then wait for the app to idle, then swipe up on the table. Like you can really see all the stuff it's doing. And it looks like it, oh, well, it worked, but I wasn't watching, so I didn't see if it actually successfully cleared out the text. Scroll. This is also why, no, it was too fast to see.
It did not.
It didn't.
No.
Another reason that UI tests take a long time is like you're just sitting there waiting for animations, and there are some tricks to speed up those animations, but generally, yeah, they take a long time. All right, let's whip out the old Google machine and find out how to clear text. I guess if the text field had a clear button, that would help a lot, because then you could just click the button, but it doesn't. Oh, looks like there's a built-in. What do we have for the answer? Did somebody answer this? Oh, this person wrote an extension. So we clear and enter text. Tap it. XCUI keyboard key dot delete. Okay, so they are repeating XCUI keyboard key delete a bunch of times.
Yes.
Fascinating. So like nothing is easy in UI tests. You have to sort of do a lot of terrible stuff yourself.
Yeah, but this does highlight an interesting topic in testing is writing helper functions.
Sure.
This is a very helpful function that clears and then enters text. And it's just on XCUI elements. So you, depending on how these functions are written, so if we look at the tap function, never mind, this is gonna be a bad example then. some of these functions return the thing that was tapped on or the application, so you can do the functional programming thing where you chain a bunch of things together. And you can write helpers that do that as well. So you could write a helper that gets the text field and it returns that out, and then you could write a wraparound tap that returns out the text field, and then you can write type text, and you can get these very language sentencey driven tests. You can do that for unit tests as well. You can make all kinds of test helpers. I even often write custom assertions. So for that tuple that we couldn't do the equals on, I might do xct assert equal tuple and write my own little function that does it for me.
So Paul Salt has an interesting idea in the chat for how to do this, which is a while loop that grabs the app delete key and clicks it. Unfortunately, and this is another just quirk of the simulator, and this is not necessarily a knock against Paul's idea, but right now we don't have the keyboard showing in the simulator. And under device or somewhere, IO keyboard, hardware keyboard, software keyboard. Yeah, we don't have a keyboard shown right now. And if we do show it, it will cover up the text field just because this app is incomplete, so we haven't built keyboard avoidance yet. So I'm guessing that the app won't have a delete key to tap. Otherwise, that is probably a good idea to do it that way. I'm going to grab this.
This does the same thing,
function.
though. It goes and gets the keyboard and hits delete.
No, it doesn't.
Isn't that what that line's doing?
No. So the one from the chat, I don't know if we can see it in the video, but it's app.key. I can type things. App.keys delete. So this is looking for a key. Oh, is it? So I don't know how app.keys works actually. Does that no documentation. I don't know if that's like keys, like keyboard keys that are on the screen. That's what I assumed it was. The one from Stack Overflow is making a string out of a special character called XUI keyboard key dot delete. XUI keyboard. Oh, that's the same thing, isn't it?
I think it might be the same thing.
No, it's not the same thing because it was a string in the example from chat. So this one here, let me put this in, and then we'll be able to
yeah, we
jump
can
to definition.
Can always run it and see what happens. It's the benefit of testing.
And copying from Stack Overflow. First of all, see our previous session on Stack Overflow driven development, but you should always say where you got something, if for no other reason than to help yourself. If you come back to it later and go, what, why is this broken, or how did this work? And then you can go back to the original post and see if there are additional comments, but also it's required by Stack Overflow's terms of service that you cite where you got stuff. Anyway, XUI keyboard key dot delete. In XUI keyboard key, it's a struct that is behaving like an enum, and it has a raw string value. So yeah, it's a magic string.
Sweet.
That's interesting. Yeah. So first of all, I'm just going to print XUI keyboard key dot delete dot raw value because I'm interested in what it is. And then I'm going to do this thing. So this will be text field clear and enter text, and we're going to do guitar pedals.
You also want to remove line 34.
I do want to do that. And then we want to hit enter. So can I
would bet there's another XEUI keyboard key for enter.
So probably text field type text XEUI keyboard key, probably return. Yeah. Return and enter are two different things. And then notice that we haven't actually asserted anything yet. So we should probably do that.
Well, this is a good conversation about coverage too. So because we've exercised the app, we would have full coverage of it at this point, but we've asserted nothing.
Yep. Did it work?
I wasn't looking in the right spot.
Watching the stream. The stream's on 5-second delay, so I can see it. Oh, the keyboard came up. That's interesting. So I can't tell if it worked. Yeah, doing UI testing is definitely a bit of a slog where you're just like constantly rerunning and trying to figure out if stuff worked.
Well, and this also highlights how we were saying that this takes so long to run. As you can see, it took about 20 seconds to run that test.
Yep. Oh, it must be some special hidden character. It's probably the, ASCII Control H, like delete character. Cool. It's neat that you can put that in a string. So you could do something like set a breakpoint after this and just that'll halt the test so it doesn't quit immediately, and then you can sort of sit there and look at what the app is doing. I'll show you a neat trick. I think this will work. I don't think this is based on any custom code in the app I'm working on, so hopefully this will work and not just be silly. So first let's look at this, and well, it looks like we did jump to the new subreddit, so we could potentially assert things on that. And then I'm just going to show you by PO, print out the app. We get the full accessibility hierarchy of the app, which is pretty cool because like when you're trying to interact with stuff at a UI testing level, this is what you're doing. You're going, okay, I have an app with a window with an other, which is some random view, with an other, with a table, with a cell on a cell on a cell, and the cells each have static text and things. So like this is the query that you have to write to get to any particular one of these cells. Now what I would normally do here is like, if this were a real app, it might have like a title up top saying what subreddit you're on, and I could assert that the title up there matched the one that I went to in the text field. We don't have a title, so that's not going to be an easy test to write. But that's kind of a contrived example in this app because it doesn't have that in the UI. So I'm not exactly sure what kind of test we might, or what kind of assertion we could write here. We could potentially find the upvote label.
Yeah, I would get the upvote label before you change subreddits, and I would assert that it's got a different value.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Now that brings up a question of flakiness. Like two subreddits could have the same number of upvotes, but it seems rare. But yeah, it might not be the most reliable test in production if you're using real production data. But sure, yeah, let's try that. So we can get rid of our tap and our swipe. We don't actually need to do that. That was just an example. Can you hit Command/? I can't for screen share reasons. Useful to leave that in as an example, but we're not using it right now. So let's hit record, and I'm just going to go find that label. So total upvotes. So if I tap on that, I didn't mean to tap twice. Here we go. So it got me a static text it just gave me that number. And this is a problem. Like if this number is going to keep changing, I can't look for a label that has that text in it. I could look for a label that has total upvotes in it, but the app might be localized or the wording might change. I want to be able to find this label without having to rely on some text in the UI. And fortunately, Apple gives you a way to do this called the accessibility identifier. It's kind of a misnomer. It's sort of part of the accessibility system, but it's not actually used for accessibility. Nobody using VoiceOver actually will ever hear this label. It's just used for things like testing. It's just a developer-only string. So what is this, a storyboard or
nope,
not so
programmatic?
Much? Cool. So drawer view controller. And then, okay, we have our ups label and our downs label. And these labels, I'm just going to set, I guess I'll do it here. So I'm going to say ups label dot accessibility identifier is ups label and downs. So with those in place, I should be able to go back to my UI test and get, let's see, let ups label equals app dot static text. And you can just do that. They use really nice use of Swift subscripts. So I can say ups label, and now I've got the ups label. Hopefully, if this works. And I can say let initial ups label value is ups label dot, I think it's value, might be you know what, I never remember which property is the property that I want. There's like value and contents and name and a couple other things, so I'm just going to run it and print stuff until I get the right thing. So let's see. I set my breakpoint. We will query and find the label. So if I print out ups label, and notice that it actually has to do a bunch of work when I print it out, because that's the point where it does the query. Until this point, it has just been a query that will run at some point. It hasn't actually gone and found anything. So I've done that, and so there it is. It shows you the whole hierarchy that it used to get there, and then it actually shows you the element it found. It's a static text with these positions on screen. You can use that for some cool testing stuff. It has this identifier and this label. So I think if I PO ups label dot identifier, oh, right, identifier is the part that doesn't change. I want, it looks like the label. So that's the part that that I actually want. So I'm just going to say the initial ups label value is ups label dot, what did I just say, label. Then we do some stuff. Presumably this will navigate to the new thing, and hopefully it'll load fast enough. Sometimes you have to like be sneaky and put in sleeps and things to get it to work, but usually it's pretty good about waiting for the app to settle down. And then we're going to say new ups label value is ups label dot label again, and then xct assert not equal, whoops, not equal initial ups label value new ups label value. Whew.
That also calls back earlier. Do we always call things in, expected and actual? And no.
Yeah. Oops.
Context is everything in coding. Really, variable names, the more context you can give into that name, the better. So I think both of those names are perfect because we know what we're testing against.
We got stuff in the chat. Label will be dynamic as long as you don't set it on the storyboard. If you set accessibility label in a storyboard, it makes it so the label does not change dynamically based on content. Right. So accessibility label, if you set the accessibility label, then that's what gets read to the user. So that's like, you don't want to touch that for testing. That's for accessibility purposes. Accessibility identifier is the one that you can set if you need a way to grab a label for testing.
And you actually want that to be static. So you want to
Yes.
always grab the same label every time.
Yeah, you don't even want to localize it.
Yeah, absolutely. Whereas the accessibility label, you do want to localize and you do want to be dynamic because you're reading UI to someone, so they need to know what they're supposed to be interacting with.
Yeah. So in fact, our test failed because the label is equal both times. I'm guessing that's because it didn't have time to load, or our return. Oh, we found that return did work, right? So we probably just need to, let's see, is there a special way to wait in a test, or do you just do sleep?
There is a way. I wrote an extension for it, so I don't know what it is. I know what my extension is for it.
I Googled it, so if you want to...
Yeah, I'll up the count.
Button. The only things I'm finding are terrible. Like, it's just garbage. There's not a one-liner for this. You have to like write disgusting things. Like NS predicates, and then basically there's nothing that just says wait, so you just have to write a nothing predicate and then wait for it. That's silly. Yeah, I just put in a sleep and I'm happy with the sleep.
Sleep should work.
Yeah. Something worth mentioning, because it may not be obvious, is UI tests run in a totally separate process. Like, it's a different app. Actually, if you look on the simulator, you will see that there's a separate app called like Redditor Test Runner or something. So sleeping in the test process generally won't cause problems, but you might trigger some timeouts or things that you otherwise wouldn't have. So It's flaky. There's a reason you're finding a bunch of blog posts on like how to reduce test flakiness.
This is what I've used.
These aggregator sites are the worst.
How to assert that an element exists. I've made assertions for this and I love them.
Yeah, that's the other thing is like you've made a query. It doesn't mean you actually know the element exists and is on screen. So you have to actually assert that it exists. And this is another place also where one assertion per test kind of breaks down, because when you're writing XE test stuff, XE UI test stuff, excuse me, they can be so flaky that it really pays to sprinkle liberal amounts of assertions for like existence into your test. So like, go get an element, assert that that exists. Go get a sub element, assert that that exists, so that when something fails, you don't just like have this giant chain of things and it failed somewhere. It becomes very easy to say, the screen existed, but the button didn't. That's easier to use.
Yeah, I'm gonna put this in chat because I think his name is Joe Mazzoliotti. He has some really good testing tips, not just for XE UI tests, but
awesome.
Unit testing as well.
Yeah. Okay, cool. So I'm gonna cheat and just use a sleep.
Yeah, that's fine.
Whatever gets the job done.
We're getting close to the end of the session.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm gonna sleep in more ways than one. Cool. It worked. We asserted they were not equal, and they weren't, even though we can't see them, which is another cool thing. Like, this app is broken, right? The thing doesn't come up from the bottom when the keyboard comes up, so you can't actually tell looking at it whether it's working until you build that feature. But we just wrote a test that went and found that element and asserted that it was correct, or at least that something was happening, right? We could get more detailed about the values in the thing, or we could print them out for debugging. But like, it's a good demonstration of this is working. And now as you go and add other stuff, like you might write the feature that makes the keyboard come up from the bottom, but you might accidentally break the updating of the label when you do that. If you're changing stuff, this test would then start failing and you'd be able to catch it, which is kind of the whole point of tests is, and I don't think I mentioned this earlier, but like, this is kind of how I think of tests. Like, you hear a lot of people complain that when you're doing a lot of testing, you're just wasting time writing all your code twice. And in a sense, yes, you are writing all your code twice, but the idea is to basically arrive at the same answer through two different methods. And then if either of those methods breaks, hopefully the other one will catch it. So like you have a math function that does math to arrive at an answer. That's one method. And the other method is just given an input, we know this is what the output should be. And so these are two methods of going from the input to the output, one because we already know and one because we're calculating it. And then if you edit the math function and you accidentally break something, now a given input no longer maps to the same output. That hard-coded test is going to catch it, which is kind of the whole point.
I think there's like a few things to call out in that as well. Like we talked about test flakiness. And I believe it was Paul in chat called out the bug that we have in the table where if you start scrolling, you can see the styling goes away. Well, we have a test that says if it's even, it should be dark. If it's odd, it should be light. Why is that happening? Well, I can tell you it's because we're reusing the cell and we're not resetting it. But also our test is only testing that logic happens, not that logic interacts well with iOS or the overall world. So when you're writing your tests, it's important to write them in different ways and to hit as many entries into your code as possible. So we're doing one specific entry into the logic of that. We could do another one in this UI test where we swipe it and say, make sure everything's always alternating. That would be a failing test, and we can go and we could have found that bug and fixed it. And now we'd have a test that proves that when we start redoing things or changing things, we still have that alternating coloring.
Can you use the point-free snapshot testing in a UI test?
I don't know.
Because that'd be really useful if you could. And I know Xcode has snapshotting, like when your UI tests fail, if you're running like Xcode bots, which nobody is, it'll show you screenshots of what failed, which is cool. But I don't know if the point-free stuff hooks into that.
Yeah, I don't know. And I have used Xcode bots and I like them.
Ah, cool.
So with 4 minutes left, let's open up the floor again to questions. And while we're doing that, I'm just going to quickly commit this and we can talk a little bit about CI and GitHub. Also,
Paul Salt says the logic is not complete because it didn't handle both cases. Yeah, the thing to color the cells had an if but not an else. So is that the problem, or is it that they weren't reset? I guess, yeah, if that function were called on every cell and it had an else, then yes, it would reset the cell, the label text colors totally.
Yeah,
I feel like Suresh Conley even had a blog post about that missing else. Like basically, you should be very suspicious of an if that doesn't have an else.
If not him, there have been plenty of people that have written about code smells, and anytime you have an if that doesn't have an else, that's considered a code smell. I haven't yet landed on how I feel about that statement, because maybe you don't do anything, and I don't want a bunch of else's that say don't do anything.
No, totally. But it's something to look out for. Like it should just always be something when you write an if, you go, okay, and then what if it's false? It especially comes up in things like cell reuse.
Yeah, and I think that's where TDD comes into handy as well, because you can start talking about okay, I'm hitting my sum function. Maybe our function signature takes in an optional third integer. What happens if I pass nil to that? What happens if I send a positive number? What if I send a negative number? What if I can I send a float? What happens? You know, like when you're writing your tests, you should be almost thinking like a QA person and like, how can I break the code that I've just written or I'm about to write? And if you can write that test, you're saving a QA person from manually testing that scenario later. You're saving your teammate from scratching their head as to why something magically broke. Whole bunch of things. So unit testing, UI testing, all of the testing is good for several reasons, because you can keep yourself honest. But when you're working on a team, it's even better because you can set up something called continuous integration, or CI, that can do a bunch of things based on different events that happen to your code base. And so a very common one is when someone opens a pull request, maybe you want to run the unit tests. When your pull request has been merged into the main line, maybe you want to run the unit tests and generate a build. And so that's where your CI can come into handy. And GitHub, I believe within the year, released GitHub Actions, which is their sort of play on continuous integration. There are plenty of services out there, like Circle and Travis and Jenkins and Bamboo and many others. Bitrise is a great one. And they all have different payment structures. They all have different requirements. Like Jenkins, I don't know if you can just go to Jenkins and say do CI for me. You actually have to put that on a machine, whether that's in the cloud or physical. GitHub has their own little caveats where it's free, but it's free for an amount of time per month. So if you go over that time, they'll start charging your account. So we can set up some workflows on this, and beautiful one click, I pressed set up this action and it says on pushes to my main branch, run this job. On pull requests to my main branch, run this job. And so first it declares that it's using GitHub Actions version 2. it gives a name to what it's about to do, which is run Swift build, and then it gives a name to what it's about to do, which is run the tests, and it runs the tests.
Is that going to work even though we're not using a Swift package manager project?
I don't know. Fantastic question.
I'm guessing you're going to want to do a Xcode build, and it's going to get messy. But I guess we'll find out.
Let's put this on the main branch.
YOLO.
So this creates a swift.yaml file in your workflows directory. It's in your .github, which is an invisible file that sits in your repository, your code base. We can open a pull request. So we're taking the code from our session and we're saying, hey, once this is past approvals, can we put it into our main? And I hit create and it's just sitting here thinking, okay. So if I go over to actions, we can see something's happening. It's trying to run CI against the create Swift YAML and it failed, which means probably this will fail. We can go in and we can see why this failed.
Or can we?
I think you're right in saying that we're not using Swift Package Manager.
Manifest not found. Yeah, that probably means no Swift package file found.
What Z shell config am I using to show my branch highlighted in terminal? I am using, I think it's called PowerShell.
Like
power level
Windows
10,000.
Yeah.
Yeah, that looks right. I've got a few. I've changed my configs over time too. I don't remember.
I could take a quick crack at fixing this if you want, or we could leave it as an exercise to the reader.
Yeah, we'll take a crack. We can call it a night if it doesn't work, and if it does, we can call it a night too.
There's a cliche of like somebody will post a screenshot like I finally got my CI working, and it's a screenshot of like 50 commits that are like fix CI, fix CI, fix CI, fix CI. You start getting into all caps and then typos, and yeah. So
I've made those commits.
Yeah. Can you? I don't know your Git setup. Can you rebase or merge master? I mean main or whatever, just so we have that YAML file locally. I just want to edit it locally. We could actually edit it on the branch, right? Like the branch that we're working on, and then in the pull request, it will.
We can, except for it wouldn't work because it already needs to be there to do the pull request against main.
All right, we'll just do it here. So I'm actually going to figure out what command to run in the terminal. So I'm going to go, I know Xcode build a little bit, so I'll be able to kind of hand wave over some of this, but Xcode build project redditor.xcode proj scheme redditor. I think I can just say build. So we'll do build and we'll see if that works. Oh, I probably have to set some kind of, I need to set a target like device or something. Oops. So this is where stuff gets a little messy, but I should have a local project that happens to have this set up correctly, but you can Google around for like Xcode build stuff. See.
It's trying to do provisioning, and I've let my account lapse, so we can't provision.
Yeah, but we don't need to provision. I think it's just because it's trying to run on device by default.
Yeah.
I think what we need.
I think you need to do like destination iOS simulator or something like that.
Right. Yeah, you might want to just Google for that, because the thing I was looking for, I don't have easy, quick access to. So yeah, Xcode build iOS simulator destination.
In Xcode 5, no thank you.
I would add in iOS simulator or simulator because it's pretty. Oh, destination. Yeah, see, it's destination, but then we need the platform stuff to be correct. So yeah, if you just add iOS simulator, I think it'll be a little easier.
SDK iPhone simulator, says Paul. Certainly try it. Sweet.
Hey, cool. So we're gonna do that for our build thing. Fortunately, it's a small app, so it builds pretty quickly. Build succeeded, great. So we're gonna take that whole command. So that's gonna be our build. And then our test, I think we can go test without building. And it will use the built products from the last, no, I can't. Test target, any simulator device, build only device. Right, so we need to specify a destination.
I can go back to Google for that.
Yeah. Oops, I added a quote. We'll have to delete. Yeah, if you can just add destination into that search from before. Try add Xcode build. Yes, a cheat sheet. That's what we need.
Pop that one right down in chat.
Mm-hmm. Here we go. No, that's OS 10. Here we go. Okay, great. So this, again, will take a little bit of fiddling because of, like, we have to name a simulator, and I've always hated this
hold on.
aspect.
But before we just take that. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we should already have some named simulators.
Right. And we'll just pick what we think is our most likely, which is probably like, iPhone 10 or something. And you can get rid of OS
we can get
equals.
it from Xcode.
Yeah, but it won't be the same as on GitHub.
Ooh.
Let's assume they have an iPhone 11.
I'll say yeah.
So you can get rid of the OS entirely. And name is iPhone 11. Sure. So try that. And we're doing tests without building because we already built it in the previous step. And we could just do it all in one step, but it's nice to have build and test as two separate phases. So if one of them fails, it's again, what are the most useful logs you can get? This will probably take a minute because it's got to actually fire up the simulator and do all the things. So while it's running, I'm going to press forward, assuming this will work. And I think I accidentally put a quote there. Okay. So let's try committing that.
Yeah.
Because who knows, it could work. Somebody asked in chat earlier, Kombucha asked, when do you run your UI tests attached to CI at night? It depends on the project and the needs of the project. I have some small personal projects where I don't have CI at all. I just run them when I think of it. I also have automated screenshots for the App Store that use UI testing. So I run those when I do a release, and often will catch some weird thing. So yeah, I just sort of run those when I think of it, sort of at the end of a development session when I'm ready to go to bed, and then it catches a bug and then I stay up too late. But on a for real project, UI tests take a long time. So if you have a big UI test suite, often you won't run them on every pull request like you run your unit tests. So you might run them nightly. I think the project I'm on right now, it runs them nightly. You could run them continuously if you can run them faster. I think with a Apple Silicon build server Mac Mini and parallelizable tests, where it runs some of your tests at the same time in multiple simulators at once, I think there's a real chance that you could get away with doing that. But again, it depends on the size of the project and sort of how long are you willing to go from when somebody breaks something to when you find out about it from an automated test. So, you kind of balance it out. We could get rid of that test example. I don't know what's wrong with it, but you could get rid of it. It might even have a failure built in. You could delete that whole... Wait, what is that? Did we add a file to our UI test? Oh, different branch.
This is a different branch. But yeah, it ran the test, so we're good.
Cool. And did it? How are we doing on CI?
Still running.
Cool. If you go into that updating CI script, we should be able to see the which step it's on, which is why they do those steps. So you can see the build step, and then when it's done with the build step, it will run the tests, and we can see the Xcode build log output, which is super exciting. If you are seeing this and thinking, oh, this is interesting, my app could use this, yes, but be warned, the person who owns and maintains the build server is the last person who touched it. Always. Doesn't matter what company you work at, that is always just how it works.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
be careful what you're getting into.
I've almost become downright rude with people that ask me to fix their problem on CI because I set it up. It's like, I don't know it's broken. You wrote the code that broke. Go look at it.
Yeah. It's a set of skills that you learn your view controllers from your view models and everything, and then you're like, okay, but what is a build artifact? It's like a totally separate world that is not very interesting or fun, and is always full of pain. So
yeah,
it's important and it's cool, but it comes with caveats.
Kevin is seeing flakiness in a handful of tests when the entire suite is run or when CI runs. The tests in question all revolve around the map view and changes to the map based on zoom. I suspect it's because of the expectations and the predicates we've written in the tests. Any pointers on how to improve the flakiness of these tests?
Mine would be the thing I said before about don't just write an assertion at the end, write assertions as you go. They won't fix the test, but they will help you pinpoint what's flaky. So, instead of opening a map, panning, zooming, searching, doing a bunch of stuff, and then asserting that something's on the screen, open the map, assert that the map is on screen. Pinch, assert that whatever is true about the map. Pan, assert something again, just constantly be asserting in the test so that if something breaks, you get more of a pinpoint about where it failed. That's one thing.
I agree with that for UI tests. For unit tests,
yes, for UI tests,
it might be that you're holding on to some state somewhere. So whether that is you're using the same view controller between two tests without resetting it, it might be hitting a database without resetting the data that's in the database. I would look for common things. So a lot of singletons will cause that problem. So for instance, if you have a singleton for your member, your user, however you want to talk about the person touching your app, you might have some tests that expect that member to be logged in, some that might expect them to be logged out. And depending on the order in which your tests are run, that user object could be left in a state that your next test is not expecting, and so it would fail. But then the next time you run it, maybe they're run in a different order, or maybe they're run at different speeds, and suddenly your test is passing. So I would look for singletons, look for shared objects, and factor them out in a way that you can change what they are and set them up differently from test to test.
It looks like they don't have the simulator that we wanted. And this is always how it goes with CI. It's one thing after another.
Yeah.
So we could either find a list of I know Circle CI publishes an official list of these are the simulators installed on our build machines. If GitHub does, I don't know where it is. So what I would usually do is put an extra phase in my build script that I know will fail. I know the build will still fail, but I just want to print out the list of all the simulators, and you can do that with a command that I saw, xrun instruments -s devices will list out the device that's available on the build machine.
there is that.
Unfortunately, the thing didn't print them out in the build log.
If I can take mouse.
Yep.
I went to a Try Swift World session.
Oh, also hit the button because I googled something.
I did.
Okay.
I went to a Try Swift World session about setting up CI.
Ooh.
And it was really good because I have set up CI in different ways, and I even played with GitHub once, and I learned a lot from this session, and there's a lot that you can do with it. This was one that we ran.
Great.
On GitHub.
Are you on the right branch? Will it be able to save this file?
I am not on the right branch. Can we do it directly in Xcode or in GitHub?
Yes. There's a line wrapping. And this will work, presumably, until the next time GitHub updates their list of installed simulators. So like there's just no way this is not going to be flaky until one of these CI services actually makes a decent UI for this instead of making you do everything through YAML files. And maybe I think Bitrise has one that has something. Buddy Build back in the day had some pretty cool stuff where you didn't need to use a script, but ultimately it seems like everybody's CI needs are so custom that you just end up having to write scripts, and it's just annoying because like nobody wants to write scripts. Maybe some people want to write scripts. No judgment.
Yeah, I think I always forget the name of it. The one that you just said, and John Sendell is often sponsored by Bitrise. I think they have
sponsored by Bitrise.
They have like a drag and drop GUI for the different things. But there's like you said, there's always a need to customize things. I like doing conditional things where like if you're opening a pull request against this branch, run these things. If you're opening against this other branch, run these other things. The good thing about there being so many different options for CI is you can find the one that works for you. I like GitHub Actions. I just don't like the cost associated, and it quickly crops up because I think running on a Mac instance is like double or quadruple the amount of minutes because so few computers are Mac instances. You're really fighting for getting time on it, which is why this takes a little bit longer than running it locally. Same things with other services like Travis. Like they have different paid tiers depending on how many people are in your GitHub organization or have access to the repo or do this or that. Well, shoot.
Well, now I know that we can edit on the page. Like, I hate everything about this. But where's the GitHub page with the? Oh yeah, it's here. And then we can go like this. We're gonna just add a step, and I'm just gonna go.
You have to do it after it uses actions.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So, add a new step. Name. Print out simulators. Run that. And then I'm just gonna cancel the build after that because I don't care what happens after it. So, print simulators.
Unrelated to CI, but GitHub is reminding Kevin of it. String files are showing up as binary and make pull request diffs a pain. He tried messing with the encoding of the file and GitHub attributes of the repo, but no luck. Do you have any suggestions?
Forget if... Yeah, this is a common problem because .strings files are technically like binary files, but they're actually just like UTF-16 text files. It's weird. For some reason I thought GitHub was handling this correctly for a local machine. Like, so the problem is you do git diff and it's like I don't know, binary file change. Like if you diff an image, it just doesn't know what to do with it. You can change there's a Git setting. Actually, here, let me pull it up while this build is running. Pretty sure I did it in this project. Oh, no.
Git diff on local machine works. It's just a GitHub thing.
Oh, yeah. I don't know. I thought there was a way to do it. Here, let me see, because there was a PR in this repo with strings files. See if see how it. Oh yeah, localizable.strings binary file not shown. I don't know of a way to make that work on GitHub. File a bug with GitHub because it's really easy to fix. Like it's a one-line change in a Git attributes thing somewhere. I'm sure it's not a one-line change for GitHub to support it, but like yeah, they support diffs for 3D models. They should be able to support diffs for UTF-16 string files.
Yeah, I don't have an answer for that.
Yeah. Oh, here we go. Oh yeah, there's a more modern version of this command. But wait, does this actually work? Xe run instruments -s devices. If I run it locally, oh yeah, there it goes. Cool. So we can actually just cancel the build because all I care about, was this print out simulators.
Can you click cancel workflow again so you can save me some minutes? Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't.
It's not canceling.
It's not canceling. When we push a new one, it should. Oh, I think it's like each step or something. I don't know. It's weird. Are you paying for this?
You start paying for it after, I think it's like 8 hours worth of runs.
Okay, so the way they're doing it, you could do it by identifier, but don't do that because like those could change whenever. So it looks like the name is in the OS version might be in the simulator name. That might be how they set it up. So I think it's iPhone 11 Pro Max parentheses 14 is the actual name.
Yeah, that seems right.
And there's a XeRun sim control flag that you can use to print this out in JSON, which is what I should have done, but I didn't know the flag. So that's something to look for. Okay, so let's try this. Yeah. So name is that, and I'm going to skip the OS version. And this is, try different simulator name, question mark. Very relatable for anybody who's done CI work. Oh, and I'm still printing out the simulators, which I don't need to do.
That's fine.
Okay.
We're getting on towards 9 o'clock, so if this one doesn't work, we hopefully at least conveyed the idea and people can Google for themselves.
I can't believe people are leaving early and not watching us poke at CI.
Not watching console output. But yeah, we can start getting towards wrapping up while this is running. Thank you all for watching. I had a lot of fun. I love testing. I love talking about testing. I love getting people excited about testing. Usually it all culminates into this, running and watching it do the tests for you and showing you that you did everything well. So yeah, if you have if you're jumping into testing and you're curious about what to do next with it, we did announce today at the top of the stream that we have a Discord. It is Learn Swift. If you do !Discord in the chat, you can get an invitation to the Discord. We have help channels for general help, iOS, macOS, server-side, scripting, and testing. So if you want to play with some of the things that you found today and you're having some troubles, jump into one of those channels and ask us some questions. We did just launch the Discord today, so there might not be a whole lot of people to help just yet, but I know I'll be available through it and I'll be keeping an eye on it, and hopefully we can get more people into it over time.
And remember that you don't have to be an expert, or you don't have to consider yourself an expert to help people. You just have to have encountered the thing that someone is asking about, or even just feel like you might be able to help them figure it out. Even if you don't know the answer, you might have a good approach to, hey, let's figure it out together. And that's often how this stuff works. It looks like it's working.
I am by no means an expert, which is why I started this meetup. Is I needed help. I needed to talk through things to sort of figure out things. And here we are, like 4 years later. Still failing.
If anybody wants to submit a pull request to make this work, we'll merge it.
Yeah, just don't go over my minutes, please. If this is your first time checking out this channel, thank you so much for being here. We stream this meetup on the third Thursday of every month. When we're not doing that, I stream just me working on little projects on the weekends, Saturday, Sunday, starting at 10 a.m. Eastern. I am taking this Saturday off because I lost my night to night doing this meetup, so I've got to do some things to catch up on being an adult on Saturday. But I'll be back on Sunday doing more coding. I'm building a server with Vapor for a side project, but also I think this December, so next month's meetup, we can talk about Vapor during that. So if you're curious about server-side Swift at all, specifically doing it with Vapor, come back the third Thursday of next month, which should be the week before Christmas, I think, because usually November matches December as far as the holiday weeks go. Yeah, thank you so much for the great questions. Thank you so much to Connell, Raziel, and Harley for the follows, and thank you so much to Kombucha for gifting out 3 subs to people in the community. Really appreciate all the love, really appreciate all the questions. I had a blast tonight, and Zev, thank you for driving.
You.
Have a good night, everyone.